To be isolated could be good or bad. You could be isolated for your protection, keeping you away from people who want to do you harm. You could also be isolated as punishment, like putting a child in a timeout for acting up. You also don't have to be alone to be isolated. There are groups of people who are isolated, like research teams on Antarctica or astronauts on the International Space Station. Isolation comes in all forms, and oftentimes extroverted people want to end that isolation and bring everybody into the spotlight. Sometimes, though, those isolated people will do anything to just be left alone. Hidden away in the Bay of Bengal, North Sentinel Island stands as one of the world's last untouched frontiers. That small forested island is home to the Sentinelese, a tribe that has lived in isolation for thousands of years. Their fierce resistance to outside contact has made the island a subject of fascination and mystery, capturing the imagination of explorers, anthropologists, and curious minds alike. The Sentinelese, also known as the Sentinelli and the North Sentinel Islanders, are an indigenous people who live on North Sentinel Island in the Bay of Bengal, which is the body of water between the east coast of India and the west coast of Myanmar. They belong to the broader class of Andamanese peoples and are designated as a particularly vulnerable tribal group. The island, which is about 60 square kilometers or 14,740 acres in size and roughly the shape of a square, lies approximately 64 kilometers or 40 miles west of Port Blair, the capital of the Andaman Islands. A notable feature of North Sentinel Island is the coral reef that surrounds it, extending between 0.9 and 1.5 kilometers from the shore. That reef not only adds to the island's ecological diversity, but also contributes to its isolation by making access difficult. The exact population of the Sentinelese remains a mystery due to their isolation and hostility towards outsiders. Estimates vary widely, ranging from as low as 15 to as high as 500 individuals. However, most estimates place the population between 50 and 200. The 2011 census of India recorded only 15 Sentinelese individuals, 12 males and 3 females, but that count was conducted from a distance and is likely not accurate. The Sentinelese are described as having dark, shiny black skin and well-aligned teeth. They are relatively short in stature, with heights estimated between 5 foot 3 inches and 5 foot 5 inches, or 160 and 165 centimeters. That shorter height could be due to insular dwarfism, nutrition, or genetic heritage. Despite their small stature, they are noted for their prominent muscles and lack of obesity. In terms of appearance, both men and women wear minimal clothing. They use bark strings as clothing, with men often tucking daggers into their waist belts. They also adorn themselves with necklaces and headbands. The women have been observed wearing fiber strings tied around their waists, necks, and heads. The Sentinelese language remains a complete mystery to the outside world. It is unclassified and believed to be mutually unintelligible with other Andamanese languages such as Jarawa and Onge. That linguistic isolation adds another layer to their already profound seclusion. The Sentinelese are hunter-gatherers, relying on the island's natural resources for sustenance. They hunt and gather in the forest, demonstrating a deep understanding of their environment. Their diet is diverse, including fruits, tubers, wild pigs, birds, and eggs from seagulls or turtles. The tribe has also developed fishing techniques suited for their coastal environment. Unlike their neighbors, the Jarawa tribe, the Sentinelese have crafted narrow outrigger canoes. Those vessels are designed for use in shallow waters and are propelled using long poles, similar to punts. From these canoes, they fish in the coastal waters and harvest crabs, showcasing their adaptability to both terrestrial and marine environments. An intriguing aspect of their diet is the significant consumption of mollusks. Anthropologists have observed an abundance of roasted mollusk shells in Sentinelese settlements, indicating that these sea creatures form a substantial part of their diet. The Sentinelese living on their Manhattan-sized island have developed unique housing structures over time. Their settlements consist of two distinct types of dwellings. The first type includes large communal huts with several hearths accommodating multiple families. These structures serve as the primary living spaces for the tribe. The second type comprises temporary shelters often spotted on the beach, designed for single-family units. Interestingly, these temporary shelters are makeshift constructions with no walls, providing basic protection from the elements. The more permanent dwellings are lean-to huts with slanted roofs covered in leaves supported by 4 poles. That architectural style suggests an adaptation to the island's tropical climate and the tribe's semi-nomadic lifestyle. The Sentinelese have developed a range of tools and weapons, demonstrating their resourcefulness and craftsmanship. They carry spears, bows, and arrows, which they use for hunting and self-defense. Those weapons are not just functional but also show artistic expression, with simple geometric designs and shade contrasts observed on their surfaces. Also notable, the tribe has incorporated metal into their toolkit despite their isolation. They scavenge metal, likely from shipwrecks on the island's reefs, and use it to create tools and weapons. The iron they collect is sharpened and used to tip their arrows, enhancing their effectiveness. That adaptation shows their ability to utilize new materials when available, without compromising their traditional way of life. In addition to weapons, the Sentinelese create other tools essential for their daily lives. They weave mesh baskets and use wooden adzes tipped with iron. Those tools aid in their hunting and gathering practices as well as in the construction of their dwellings. The Sentinelese also appreciate the value of metal objects introduced from the outside world. In 1974, they accepted aluminum cookware left by the National Geographic Society, incorporating it into their daily lives. That selective adoption of external items demonstrates their discernment in choosing what might benefit their lifestyle while maintaining their isolation. The Sentinelese are known for their fierce resistance to outside contact, often responding with hostility to those who approach or attempt to land on their island. That isolation has led to their designation as one of the world's last uncontacted tribes, preserving their unique way of life in an increasingly interconnected world. The first recorded sighting of the Sentinelese dates back to 1771 when an East India Company vessel sailed past the island and spotted lights on the shore. However, it wasn't until 1867 that the outside world had a closer interaction with the tribe. The Nineveh, an Indian merchant ship, ran aground on the island's reef. 86 passengers and 20 sailors managed to get to the beach safely, but on the morning of their third day there, they were attacked by the natives. The captain would later report, quote, "The savages were perfectly naked, with short hair and red-painted noses, and were opening their mouths and making sounds like pa and ugh. Their arrows appeared to be tipped with iron." The captain and a few sailors were able to escape in the ship's boat, and it's said that survivors were able to fend off their attackers with sticks and rocks, but it's not clear how many people, if any, died. They were eventually picked up by a Royal Navy rescue party. The British had established a penal colony on nearby Great Andaman Island in 1857, so they were able to rescue the survivors fairly quickly. A British naval officer named Maurice Vidal Portman was the black sheep of his family. That family was mostly wealthy British aristocrats, but Portman was pulled from school when he was 16 years old and sent to India. After that, he never received any part of his family fortune and he joined the Royal Navy. He was then exiled further when he was assigned to be the officer in charge of the Andamanese. He arrived in Port Blair in 1879, and while the penal colony was already established, his job was not to oversee it. His job was to deal with the islanders in general, making sure they were happy and to pacify any that became angry. That gave him more of a personal connection with the natives, and his interest in their culture grew. He began going to more remote parts of the island, but what he found was empty villages destroyed by various untreated illnesses likely brought to the island by colonizers. After that, he wanted to experience the culture of the native people in the area that hadn't been touched by outside influence. That's when he decided to travel to North Sentinel Island. In 1880, Portman began making trips to the island. First, he anchored his ship just outside the coral and rowed to the beach. He took a look around but didn't see any inhabitants. He returned 2 weeks later with the intention of making friends with the tribe. Despite his intentions being friendly, he still brought a large group of armed men with him, which only served to scare off the islanders. The men were able to catch a couple of children and give them gifts such as a looking glass, some tobacco, and brightly colored cloth. But as soon as the children were released, they dropped the gifts and ran away. The men collected some artifacts from empty huts and returned to their ship. Over the next 2 weeks, the men continued moving around the island, looking for natives to befriend, but they remained elusive. The group eventually found 3 more children and immediately sent them to their ship. Soon after, Portman and some men found an older man, an older woman, and a child in the woods. The man drew his bow, but was restrained before he could release the arrow. Those captives were also placed on the ship and taken back to Port Blair for observation. That would be the only time on record that members of the Sentinelese tribe were removed from the island. Portman would later write that he knew that his attempts to befriend the Sentinelese were a failure. He was aware that his efforts only served to scare the natives even more, but things would only get worse from there. Once on Great Andaman Island, the captives quickly fell ill and their condition deteriorated rapidly. Portman would write that he believed that it was the change in food, but it was likely a lack of immunity to common pathogens amongst the residents of the bigger island. The older couple eventually died, and Portman decided to take the children back to the island with a number of gifts. They likely brought a host of illnesses with them which caused the deaths of many of the natives, though the true outcome is unknown. In 1896, an inmate on Great Andaman Island fashioned a makeshift raft and escaped the penal colony. He floated across the ocean until he landed on North Sentinel Island, likely not realizing the danger he was in. A few days later, a search party found his body washed in the surf with several arrow wounds and a sliced throat. After that discovery, the island was left alone for quite some time, but the curious nature of human beings would not be held at bay forever. After India gained independence in 1947, efforts to contact the Sentinelese continued. In 1970, India officially claimed North Sentinel Island, marking it with a stone tablet on the beach. By then, the penal colony had been closed, but the prisoners' descendants still remained on the island. Anthropologist Triloknath Pandit led a series of contact expeditions starting in the 1970s. Like Portman's efforts before, they arrived on the island heavily armed, which only proved to scare away the natives. The group followed the tribesmen into the forest, but were not able to make contact with any of them. They left gifts such as plastic buckets, cloth, and candy, while some of the group took artifacts from the huts. Pandit went to the island many more times but was never successful at making contact with the natives for many years. In 1974, North Sentinel Island was visited by a film crew that was shooting a documentary called Man in Search of Man. With them was a couple of anthropologists, a photographer for National Geographic, and some armed police officers. As the group approached the island in their boat, the anthropologists tried to wave friendly hand signals, whatever that means. The islanders responded by shooting arrows at the boat. They landed the craft out of range of the arrows, and an officer wearing padding approached the beach and placed gifts that included coconuts, a toy car, a toy doll, some aluminum cookware, and a live pig. Back at the boat, the group watched how the natives reacted to the gifts, which didn't turn out the way they had hoped. One tribesman shot an arrow at the group and managed to hit the cameraman in the thigh. Then he laughed and sat down under a shade tree. The rest of the natives speared the pig, then they cut the nose and the ears off of the doll. They buried the toys in the sand and took the pig, coconuts, and cookware with them when they retreated back to the cover of the trees. In 1981, a 16,000-ton freighter named the Primrose was transporting chicken feed from Bangladesh to Australia in stormy conditions when it ran into some coral reefs at just before midnight on August 2nd. The following morning, they could see there was land nearby, but since the conditions were still poor, they chose to stay on the ship as it was still fairly upright. Soon, they noticed some people coming out of the tree cover, but they couldn't quite tell who they were. They hoped that they were some sort of rescue operation, but when they got a closer look, they saw men, mostly nude, waving spears and arrows at them. It was immediately apparent that they did not have friendly intentions. When the ship's lookout saw the tribesmen preparing some canoes, it was clear that they were going to try to make it to the ship. The ship's crew were unarmed. They made a distress call knowing that the 31 of them wouldn't fare well against the 50 or so armed natives. They stood guard with whatever they could find: flare guns, fire axes, and metal pipes. Fortunately, the same harsh conditions that caused the ship to run into the reef kept the canoes from reaching them. The following day, they were hoisted to safety by helicopter, and the ship has remained off the western shore of the island ever since. A breakthrough occurred in 1991 when Pondit's team made the first peaceful contact with the Sentinelese. The encounter is not well documented, but it's said that a group of islanders approached the visitors without weapons, accepting coconuts directly from their hands. However, that friendliness was short-lived, and subsequent visits were met with varying degrees of hostility. The most well-known interaction an outsider has had with the residents of North Sentinel Island happened in 2018. 26-year-old John Allen Chau had grown up in the United States and was a devout Christian. He strongly believed in spreading the word of God and began going on mission trips as a young adult. He had completed mission work in Mexico, South Africa, and Iraqi Kurdistan. He began a mission in the Andaman Islands in 2015, and he learned about North Sentinel Island, but he never traveled there during that mission trip. In 2017, John attended a type of missionary boot camp conducted by a Kansas City, Missouri-based organization called All Nations. They supposedly trained him and sent him on the mission, which Chau said was to bring God to, quote, Satan's last stronghold. He believed that he needed to bring God to the tribe despite having to break the law in order to do so. See, by then, North Sentinel Island had become off-limits to the public. The island and its inhabitants had become protected, especially since they would be highly susceptible to outside disease. While Chau was trying to bring God to the island, he could have very likely brought a host of other pathogens that could have wiped out an entire civilization. Chau traveled back to Great Andaman Island and settled in Port Blair. There he gathered gifts for the islanders, a waterproof Bible and a folding kayak. He found some fishermen who were familiar with the waters around the island to take him to the isolated tribe. On November 15th, Chau attempted his first visit to the island. The fishermen got him 500 to 700 meters, or 1,600 to 2,300 feet from the shore, where they anchored their boat. The fishermen warned him not to go closer, but Chau had a mission to complete, so he paddled his kayak toward the shore while shouting, quote, I love you and Jesus loves you. Jesus Christ gave me authority to come to you. Here are some fish. Now, the first problem that Chau didn't seem to think of was that none of the Sentinelese spoke English. Their language was and still remains a mystery to this day. The other problem was that the islanders had no idea who Jesus Christ was and thus didn't recognize his authority. Whether or not you're religious, you still need to understand that a group of people who have had almost no contact with anyone outside of their small island and speak an unknown language aren't going to recognize whatever perceived authority you feel like you have. You can't expect those words to change the behavior of a community that uses violence to keep people away from them. In 2006, 2 fishermen got too close to the island and were killed by arrows. A few weeks later, the men's bodies were propped on bamboo stakes facing towards the sea. A pretty clear message, no matter what language you speak. It was well known that the inhabitants of North Sentinel Island did not want outsiders to approach them. Knowingly charging headfirst toward people you know have attacked and killed outsiders before because you think Jesus has given you the authority to talk to them is quite delusional. So it should come as no surprise when the islanders began shooting arrows at Chau as he paddled towards them, shouting about Jesus. Chau retreated but did not give up. On his second attempt, he made it ashore and started singing hymns and reading a passage from the book of Genesis in a South African tribal language, something that had absolutely nothing in common with the people of North Sentinel Island. The only similarity between the two tribes was the color of their skin, a sign of Chau's level of naivety. A young boy fired an arrow at the missionary and hit Chau's Bible. The preacher retreated again, but was dead set on bringing the word of God to the Sentinelese. On November 17th, Chau made his final attempt to meet with the tribe on the island. He told the fishermen who escorted him to the island to leave him after they got close enough to the shore. Chau continued onto the shore and made his final attempt to preach to the tribe, but they were not interested. Not long after, the fishermen saw some tribesmen dragging a lifeless body across the sand. They stayed anchored in the waters for a few days until they saw Chau's body being buried. Then they returned to Great Andaman Island. They gave Chau's notebook to one of his friends, and that person contacted his family in the States. Once word was out, the Director General of Police issued a statement reminding the public that the islands and a buffer zone were off limits to the public, and entering that zone without government permission was illegal. The police scouted the island from boats, trying to see if they might be able to recover Chau's body, but the efforts were eventually abandoned. The fishermen who took Chau to the island, plus a few other people who helped him prepare, were arrested, but I couldn't find a resolution to that. Chau's effort to bring God to North Sentinel Island failed, but what it did do was bring sudden and overwhelming attention to the island. Before, it was a relatively obscure island that wasn't of much value for anyone outside of its occupants. Now, tourists and influencers all over the world know about the island and its off-limits status. It makes it harder for the Indian government to keep the tribe protected. The protection of the Sentinelese aligns with international standards for indigenous rights. The 2007 UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples enshrines the right to self-determination and autonomy for indigenous groups. For uncontacted peoples like the Sentinelese, it's interpreted as the right to be left alone. Despite protective measures, enforcing the isolation of North Sentinel Island presents ongoing challenges. The Indian Coast Guard patrols a buffer zone near the coast to prevent outsiders from coming too close. However, incidents like the 2018 death of John Chau highlight the difficulties in completely preventing unauthorized access. The Indian government faces a delicate balance between protecting the Sentinelese and respecting their autonomy. While they maintain a hands-off policy for North Sentinel Island, plans for nearby Great Nicobar Island to become the Hong Kong of India have raised concerns. In February of 2004, 39 international genocide experts described that plan as a death sentence for indigenous communities in the region. The debate around non-intervention also centers on the balance between cultural preservation and potential benefits of modern integration. The Indian government's approach has evolved over time. In 1996, regular gift-dropping missions to the Sentinelese were stopped. Many officials began to question the wisdom of attempting to contact a people who were healthy and content and had thrived on their own for up to 55,000 years. As we look to the future, the fate of the Sentinelese remains uncertain. The Indian government's hands-off policy aims to protect the tribe, but it also brings up concerns about their long-term survival in a changing world. Still, one thing is clear, and that's that individuals should stay away from the island, no matter what reason you might have for wanting to go there. Whether you want to bring them food, tools, God, or just have an overwhelming curiosity to see what the Sentinelese are like, they have made it overwhelmingly clear that they want to remain isolated from the rest of the world, and you alone are not going to change their minds. Thanks for letting us tell you this sinister story. If you enjoyed it, subscribe on whatever platform you're on, and hit like, rate it, or leave a comment. Join us next week when we'll take you somewhere sinister.